Good morning and welcome to breakout session number 2, effective resume writing. My name is Tara Hertzstein and I will be your moderator for today's session. And with that, I'm happy to introduce you to today's presenter, Kim Sapp Dinwiddie.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Sapp Dinwiddie. I am happy to present Resume's Employer Select and getting an interview invitation with you today. I've been presenting this topic at the NOW conferences since its origin in 2013. This is, of course, my first time presenting it virtually. However, I'm usually in front of about 200 of you in a very large room, and we'll definitely miss you all in that capacity today. But let's go ahead and move forward. So my background is that I am a training manager in talent management and workforce planning at University Development and Alumni Relations right now. I've been there for 5.5 years and spent 8.5 years in Central HR, what is now People and Culture, as a senior talent acquisition consultant and staff career development trainer. And then 5 years prior to that, I was a program director at UC Berkeley Extension. So I've spent 18.5 years at Berkeley now. So Tara mentioned a few of the specifics around the protocol for today's session. As you know, because of the size, you are all muted during the presentation. However, you can certainly pose your questions to Tara during the Zoom chats opportunities, and then we will have 4 intervals during the session where you will be able to ask your questions, and she will share what you have specified in chat with me, and I will address them at that time. We don't recommend that you ask about personal specific job application stories or anything like that because we won't have the capacity and time to go into those during the 1-hour time block we're allotted. And then if you could please complete the presentation evaluation that Tara will send to you at the end, that would be greatly appreciated as well. Okay, so let's get started. So when it comes to writing a resume, the most critical thing to really think about is that this document is a self-marketing document. So if you look at the concept of branding and advertising and how we market ourselves, you really need to be conscientious of what your objective is with that self-marketing document, what your goal is. And in that, demonstrating your highest level of responsibility, your highest level of contribution as an employee to an employer. So as specified in the secondary title, the purpose of the resume, in essence, is to get the job interview invitation. You want that resume to stand out among sometimes 100, 150 that are submitted, and you want it to highlight your qualifications and experience specifically relative to the job you're applying for, so that you have taken a concerted effort to be very strategic in your effort to market yourself for that specific job. Why do you need a resume? Well, number one, it's pretty standard protocol in all job application processes. But again, it's going to market your skills, your experience, and your highest level of contribution to that employer. And that's the goal of that resume, so that you do get the interview invitation. The other thing to really be conscientious of is that that resume and what you put in writing to that employer is a significant point of reference for that employer. In addition to the set interview questions that they create for the interview that you are coming in to have for that job, your resume is a point of reference for them to continue to ask questions and explore. You have basically created a lawful document for them to explore with that resume, and in so they will consider doing that. You need to realize that the resume, of course, won't get you a job on its own merits, and that all the other processes thereafter will be imperative as well, such as the job interview. But the resume is the thing that gets you in the door. And you can't even have a job interview unless that resume passed its test. All right, when we talk about a well-designed resume and what's important when you think about designing that self-marketing document. We're going to talk a little bit about how to apply job description terminology, knowing your stakeholders that are potentially on the interview committee and who's going to have a vested interest in whether or not you are the person hired for that role. We're going to talk about resume design, formatting, and mechanics as well. Let's see here. So when we talk about the resume being aesthetically pleasing, that has a number of components. One, it has to be easy for the stakeholders to read. Any of those vested in this particular outcome of this position and hire is going to want to be able to read it and read it easily. So it must contain appropriate content to summarize your knowledge, skills, and abilities, or KSAs, as we call them, for the job you're applying for. And this is going to be really important because if you look through the actual job posting for any given position, there are going to be some key words in there, some key responsibilities, some key number of years of experience, things like that. Those are going to be really key for you to put into the resume, and especially into the summary of qualifications, throughout your jobs that have specific skills they're asking for, and throughout a cover letter that is submitted as a partner to that resume. Any applicant tracking system that a company has, to include Berkeley, will be able to conduct keyword searches on those resumes in a pool of 100 or 150. And when all the keywords that are affiliated to the job description are populated within your resume, because you are obviously showing your particular experience and the highest level contribution you're providing, then that populates in that search that a recruiter does, and yours will show up if you are meeting all of those specified criteria and have those specified areas of experience. So those keywords can be extremely valuable in really showing the employer that you have a match for match job experience specific to that posting and that job. So essentially, you need to realize that, believe it or not, most employers and recruiters and hiring managers take about 15 seconds to scan it when it's printed out in front of them. And if those keywords are there and it is nice and easy to read, that scan is your resume will survive that scan, and then they will want to look at it and dive into it further. So the other important factor to think about is the formatting of your resume. So there are three primary types of resume formats. One that a lot of people are familiar with is obviously a chronological resume that outlines your background from your most recent experience and proceeds backward through your work history. A functional resume is the type of document that highlights your skills and experience, and then has a often separate page of specified chronological work history, just your jobs listed, etc. And although a lot of people through the years have been encouraged to use this kind of document, especially when they're applying for a job that is different than their most recent or last couple of titles, but they're trying to highlight their transferable skills into that role. The problem is that even though that was taught and often recommended for those situations, the reality is employers actually hate functional resumes. Bluntly put, they don't like them at all. And people, whether conscious or not, have a tendency to sort of put those at the bottom of the pile. So the idea here is, when you want to create a resume to draw in an employer for your skills and what you've done, versus the specific job titles that may not be similar to the job you're trying to apply for, the focus needs to be a combination style resume to list your experience in a chronological format, but highlight the skills within each of those jobs so that they're seeing both. And then they're comfortable with the nature of the chronological resume, which is very commonplace to them. They're used to seeing it. They like and prefer that. But then you're also able to maintain the chronology by highlighting that type of skill-based format. So what I'm going to do right now is take a brief minute to just show you what I mean. So let's see here. You all see that? Hopefully I get some head nods. The bottom line is this is a resume that shows you the chronology of this person's job, Amanda Fossey. She has a summary of qualifications, which is always key, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But the other thing you'll note here is she's got her job titles right here, and then and organization, of course. And then underneath that, she's got the 3 main areas of her skills that she wants to market to the employer based on what she did in that job that's correlated to the next job of interest. So gift solicitation, volunteer management, communication and marketing. And then again, in the next one, gift solicitation and strategy, communication and marketing. The one thing to think about, some people are concerned about oftentimes, is should I repeat my skills secondary headers, this gift solicitation, volunteer management. For example, the first job listed here has communications and marketing. The second one has communications and marketing. And the answer to that is absolutely, especially if the jobs that you had in the past have incorporated those use of skills on a regular basis, and the next job you're trying to apply for is really wanting a substantially skilled individual in that area. So seeing that pattern of repetition through your experience, through your chronology of positions, and then highlighting it underneath each of your specific titles and organizations can be extremely valuable and strategic in showing a pattern of capacity and capability for that employer. So let's go ahead and go back to the presentation. So that's my highest recommendation, is to really utilize a combination style resume, maintain your chronology, but really think about how to add your secondary skills headers to show your highest level of skill contribution that is directly tied from your past jobs to the next one of interest. So continued efforts in formatting. So some of this stuff may seem a little bit sort of rudimentary to talk about, but believe it or not, they can have a big impact. So for example, when you pick a font, you obviously want to pick one that is commonplace, believe it or not, and really easy to read. You can choose something like serif or sans serif, doesn't really matter. Whatever really kind of you feel like expresses your personality or whatever, and what you like is what you should use. Just always keep in mind to keep it no smaller than 10 and no larger than 12, except for your headers. You can make your headers 16 point or 14 point, for example. But the key there is to be consistent. So if you choose to bold all of your job titles, they need to be bold throughout the entire document. And then the other thing too, if you don't choose to bold a title and instead you decide to underline it, you need to have the title underlined throughout, because that pattern of consistency creates an aesthetic value that allows the reader to skim and creates a better experience for that 15-second scan. And then they get a sense of, oh, this pattern means this. This specific way of using this kind of font or writing or typeface means this. And so they begin to sort of categorize and chunk, call it chunking in psychological terms, chunk that information, which makes it actually easier to absorb. So, and then again, same concept with bolding, italics. Anything that you choose to bold, you have to be consistent with that throughout. Anything you choose to italicize or underline, same concept there. It really allows you to fill the page with consistency and create a really aesthetically pleasing document. So when we look at strategic sections and headers on a resume, you actually have a lot of latitude here, but once again, you got to be a little bit careful because employers are used to seeing certain things. So you want to make sure there's some element of commonplace things that they're used to seeing that won't make your resume stand out negatively. So for a header and content information, always, of course, your name at the top. It should be the largest font. and contact information. These days, because so much is electronic, it isn't essential to put an address, but you absolutely can. Some people might strategically, who are trying to move from a different area of California or something like that, they may leave the address off and just have their phone number and contact information, email, etc., LinkedIn page perhaps, as well as their name versus their address. But generally speaking, the address is not a major deterrent for an employer checking you out for a particular job and reviewing your resume. If your skills are there and you're a quality match, they're going to contact you. When it comes to a summary of qualifications in terms of headers, I know I mentioned it when I showed you the sample, but this is really, really imperative. That is the best word to consider when we talk about a summary of qualifications. Some people don't do it on a resume, and you're really doing yourself a disservice if you don't, because this is the area you get to be the most strategic. So much so that we're actually going to dive into that next and spend quite a bit of time on that right after our first opportunity for you to ask questions. A technical skills summary is optional on a resume, and a lot of people who are in jobs that are scientific in nature or IT systems-based positions or hard sciences like engineering, etc. That is the commonplace for a technical skills summary to be front and center on a resume, actually. So below a summary of qualifications on somebody who's highly technical in nature, you might want to have a couple of columns that feature all your technical skills that are going to be imperative to that employer, especially the ones that are cited and highlighted on the job description specifying that they need or want that, to include the number of years of experience. So needless to say, that technical skills summary can be strategic for people in those fields. If you are not in a highly scientific or technical based field or job, family, I don't recommend the skills summary for technical skills until towards the very end of the resume. And in that case, your technical skills are essentially enabling you to do the job that you do on a regular basis, and those skills are important, but they are not something you should highlight before your highly related skills in your professional experience section. So that's what I recommend in terms of your order there. And again, the technical skills is merely optional and towards the end of the resume if you're not a technical based profession. Professional experience, the thing to think about here with this specific section of a resume is that you need to be conscientious that this is the meat and potatoes of the document. This is the majority of the content that is going to take up your space on your pages, and the area that the employer really wants to hone in on. The summary catches their eye and gets them hooked, and the professional experience, if highly related to the nature of the job that they're interested in hiring you for is related, they're going to really dive in deep to read that. So this is the area a lot of your time will be spent in creating a highly effective resume, and you just need to be able to sort of have multiple iterations of sitting down, working on it, stepping away, because this is the part that needs the most work. Education is important to put on a resume, and critical that it be accurate. Everything you do and everything you've done should be at the highest level of contribution and accomplishment and experience. However, it must never be false or fraudulent, put it that way. I had a colleague at Berkeley years ago who our boss found out that she had a degree specified on her resume from UC Berkeley. And it turns out she was 2 or 3 classes shy of the actual awarding of her bachelor's degree. And because of that, she could have been terminated for fraudulent information. But her boss said, I'm going to give you the opportunity to take those 2 classes this year. You have 1 year to finish it. And then he didn't terminate her. And she did finish it, but she's lucky because in a given situation, an employer has a lawful capacity to terminate in a situation like that. Honors awards and associations can be very valuable on a resume, but only if they are highly related. Okay, we're going to get into that too. All right, this is our opportunity for you to go ahead and ask questions about the content we've reviewed so far pertaining to design, formatting, sections, headers, etc. Tara's going to look through your chat questions and let me know what you'd like to talk about for the next few minutes.
Okay, Kim, folks are lively this morning. We have about 6 of them. 3 of them are more on the short side, and then we have a few that are a little bit longer. So on the short side first, can folks get copies of the resumes?
Yes, I will be able to provide Tara with those, and then she will be able to interface with the committee at the Now conference and find out if they can feature those on a specific website where they will also be able to feature the slide decks.
Perfect. Also, can you speak a little bit more about listing degrees since listing the year is subject to age discrimination?
Yes, and that's an excellent question. I actually have that in a little while, but I'll skip to it now and then later skip it when we're down the road on education. This is a really strategic thing that you can do on a resume, and actually, quite frankly, if you are not a recent grad within the past 5 years and you're not using your education to sell you as much, but are rather using your experience from the last 10 to 15, 20 years to sell yourself, I highly recommend you remove the degree date and leave it off entirely, because it can be certainly, although not lawful for an employer to discriminate based on perceived age because of the degree date, it can and does happen. And we have to be honest that that is likely. Even if somebody's not conscious they're doing it, I do think it still happens. So you're right that leaving the degree date off is valuable.
Okay, great. So how long should summaries be to allow for more meaty sections?
You're going to get a full dose of that next. So I'm going to wait and defer that question to the content coming.
All right. So how far should folks go back in terms of chronologically with regards to their resume?
This is a really good question, because when you think about wanting to highlight your greatest contribution, the work that you've done, the time frame that you've done it, the one thing to be conscientious of is you are not required to put everything you have ever done on a resume. In fact, you can be strategic about what it is. However, you should be very conscientious of gaps. So if you have more than a year gap between jobs, it can be a red flag to an employer. I mean, quite frankly, their worst fear is that you spent, a year or 2 in jail. And believe it or not, I mean, that sounds like a joke, but the reality is they want to know what you were doing. And so even in the case, for example, where people did take time off work, perhaps even to take care of a sick relative or something like that, I often highly recommend that you specify, a caretaking role for that year or 2 and indicate the things that you did for that family member or friend or whatever it was, so that they know what you were doing, and so that that tells them a little bit about your character, and it also removes any red flags they may have around that. And this includes maybe a 5 to 10 year hiatus that a working mom took from the workforce. Head of household and all the requirements of that, the finances, the coordination, etc., absolutely can be listed as a job, and highly recommended, once again, to avoid gaps. Oh, one more thing on that. For example, if you have done 20 years or more of work, and all that work is still coordinated and reflected in the nature of the work you're doing today, meaning it's sort of a career ladder advancement, and all that you did years back still correlates, you can go back that far and list that much. But if it's what's highly related to the job of interest only in the last 10 years, you can just highlight that as well.
Okay, great. Really quickly, how do you recommend folks display their KSAs, so their knowledge, skills, and abilities that are similar for each of their positions, so it doesn't look redundant?
We're going to talk about that next too.
Okay. And lastly, What's the best way to show career growth if you stayed at the current job or company or even department, but you've been promoted from maybe a level 1 to a level 2 or 3?
Yes, we're going to talk about that too, especially when we get to accomplishment statements and PAR statements and the secondary headers. But to specifically address that question, you're going to want to start and kick off your descriptors with things like promoted from this to this within this block of time, which was, unusual or at an exponential rate because of contributions on XYZ projects, things like that. So you're going to literally use the action verb of promoted when you have been promoted. And sometimes people choose to bridge and merge those two jobs together, and sometimes they choose to list them separately. It's all going to be based on the strategy of what's probably going to be most valuable based on the job you're applying for.
Looks like we have one last formatting question.
Okay.
Regarding recruitment software. So someone is mentioning that they've noticed that when they upload their stylized resume as a PDF, that the system pulls the information to autofill the online form through the system. The formatting can kind of get garbled. So, is there a risk that the system won't flag that resume and make it not as competitive?
Well, it's interesting. I'm surprised to hear that a PDF, formatting would be fouled up because technically the PDF shouldn't be something that can be altered once submitted. That's why it is so valuable to turn a Word document into a PDF. So I honestly have never seen a PDF transitioned and kind of garbled, and that's why I recommend it over submission of a Word document. Maybe there is a different format, literally kind of like a PNG takes a picture, so to speak, and then it also technically couldn't be changed. So if you're a lot of design elements to your resume, you could potentially change it to that, but that might require some playing around with. I've always recommended a PDF, so.
All right. For this section, that is all the questions we have.
All right, great. Well, I realize now we have a half hour left. So we're going to continue at a really decent clip to get through this information so you get everything you need today. When we talk about summary of qualifications, I really like to dive deep into this because it has a tendency to be an area people struggle with because it's a little bit foreign to them. Think of the summary of qualifications as the lead into the resume, number one, and that it is a short list of 4 to 5 descriptors that summarizes qualifications that you've had from your past that once again is related directly to the job of interest. It can include headers that pertain to the area of expertise if you want to highlight for the new employer, but it can also just be 4 or 5 bullets. You should engage the recruiter or hiring manager to sort of dig in and read your resume more thoroughly with your summary, and that's the goal of that portion of the resume. So let me give you an example. The very first section of your summary of qualifications should be what I call the professional identifier statement. What this means is how you are identifying who you are and how you're wanting to sell yourself to the employer of interest. So it can be more general and it can be very specific. So for example, in this situation, you always want to focus on your business title rather than your functional title. For example, at Berkeley, a lot of people don't know what a blank assistant 3 is or a programmer analyst is. They want to hear senior network engineer or payroll assistant. They want to know what functions of your job translate to the title. And you want to create a title that is more clear in the nature of your work. So believe it or not, you can effectively and strategically alter your title just a little bit to be able to best describe your work without feeling like you're being fraudulent or anything like that. So, a blank assistant 2 in a training department might have themselves down as a training and operations coordinator or something, for example. So that's how you want to hone in on targeting your title as it's affiliated to your work and job of interest. So in this case, your professional identifier statement for someone as a senior network engineer may be senior network engineer with 7 years of experience in the telecommunications industry, particular experience in A, B, and C. This pattern of highlighting the number of years and, of course, specifying that 7 years of experience is something you've had when 5 are required for the job already immediately sells you as having the minimum requirements to do that job. And so the other thing is showing I have particular expertise in these 3 areas as long as it is in fact accurate, you can go into that job posting and see the 3 main areas that they really want somebody to have experience doing or skills in having based on your experience, and tie them and point them out immediately in that professional identifier statement. It's extremely powerful and strategic when formulating your summary. Step 2, you're essentially going to sort of create this funneling effect where your professional identifier statement shows you what you want to convey to that employer, and then you're going to go into some more broad and specialized areas of tech expertise as you go down in the funnel. So this is where you describe what is unique about your experience. So proven expertise in design, development, and implementation of complex infrastructure systems. That, of course, you're going to want to make sure is highly related to the job that you're applying for. And then once again, a little more depth and breadth and going down a little deeper, initiated system design changes, published analysis, and presented at international conferences, or uniquely skilled in communication of complex data to general audiences. So if the job's requiring those things and you've done it, those kind of general and more specific areas of expertise within that background is going to be very strategic to put in your summary. And then the step 4, and it could be your 4th or 5th bullet or area in your summary of qualifications. And this is something that I highly recommend you include something that you're highly recognized for by managers. So it's not necessarily a hard skill or a quantifiable skill. Maybe it is a qualitative skill. And so in that nature, maybe you have in your performance evaluations and reviews that you're recognized for strong leadership, innovation, and operations management. And that pattern shows up many, many times in your performance reviews. That's the kind of thing you want to feature in your summary, especially if the job is requiring leadership or supervision or management or something like that. So those are the things that you want to hone in on. And, you know, of course, the bottom line is you're going to be recognized and known for many things. So again, be strategic about this one thing you're going to highlight in your summary, even though the rest may show up throughout your actual professional experience section and document. So finally, putting it all together for the summary, you see something like this: senior network engineer with 9 years of experience in the telecommunications industry, particular expertise in A, B, and C. And of course, you're not saying A, B, and C, you're specifying what that is. And then design, developed, and implemented complex infrastructure systems, initiated design changes, system changes, published analysis, and presented at international conferences, uniquely skilled in communication of complex data to general audiences, recognized for strong leadership, innovation, and operations management. So this, in essence, would be your selling tool to get the recruiter or the hiring manager to read further into the document. Okay. Now, for the professional identifier statement and summary of qualifications, here's an opportunity to ask any more questions you didn't feel were answered by what we just talked about.
All right. So maybe now is a good time that we could talk about maybe how long those sections should be.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity to point out to you a couple of options. So here is a summary of qualifications on another sample resume that we did not see earlier. And here, not only is it not bulleted, whereas the first one you saw was, this one has headers. So this person specifying in their professional identifier statement they are a senior professional in human resources, which is obviously a certified human resources professional. And then they're specifying the areas of interest in HR and administration and operations. So this is one strategy. And then the other one, of course, is the bulleted format, which, a moment here. Here's the bulleted sample. So your professional identifier statement is showing up here, bold and italicized. And then your supporting areas of depth and breadth around expertise are showing up underneath that bolded, italicized professional identifier statement. So those are a couple of ways that you can be strategic in format. Other questions?
Sure. So what are your thoughts on, your resume should be on one page, or at least condensing it to 2 pages? What do you think the ideal number of pages should be?
We're going to talk about that towards the end. Actually, I have a section on that. However, the bottom line is, I'm going to tell you quickly, 1-page resume is a myth and not something you should abide by. If you have 20 years of experience, there's no way you can get that on 1 page and effectively show the level of contribution you're able to provide an employer. You will create a disservice to yourself and the employer in doing a 1-page document. Your resume could range anywhere from 1 page to 4 pages. I probably wouldn't go past 4 unless it's a CV and academic in nature. However, be conscientious of, is this relevant and would the employer want to know this about me? Ask those questions and that will help formulate the length.
What about verbs, past versus present?
Oh, great question. So here, you want to keep everything that was past tense, and anything that's present tense. It's that simple. So if you're currently employed in the job you're in and you're applying for other jobs, that content and descriptors are going to be present tense and everything else will be past.
So if not all of the previous experience is related to the job that they're applying to, what are your thoughts about if they should still list that work experience?
You should list it if you're trying to avoid revealing gaps. You should definitely list it and just hone in on creating the descriptions that are most transferable and related to the nature of the work you're doing. So you might not list everything you did on that job, but you're going to list the things that are most related or have adjacent skills that'll be beneficial to the employer of interest.
Just a few more. How flexible should someone be when creating a title for their resume, so a business title?
In terms of their professional identifier statement, it could be anything like senior HR professional to what kind of HR professional, like a training and development person or a labor relations or employee relations, for example. So you can get really specific into what kind, or you can remain general. And that's really going to depend on the nature of the job you're applying for and the degree to which you are trying to open and broaden up a more macro approach of selling the transferability of your skills versus just honing in on your titles. If your titles are highly related and specific to the nature of the job you're applying for, then you don't have to worry about that so much and you can be more specific. But sometimes when you need to be more general is when you're trying to transfer and show the ability to do the next job based on the skills that you use rather than the title.
Okay, do we have time for one more?
Go ahead, one more, and then we'll move
forward. Can you speak a little bit about strategies for summaries of qualifications for those who are looking to transition their careers?
You want to hone in on the specific skills that are highlighted in the job posting that you can show a match between what you've done for your work and how related that is to this next job, even though your titles may not be the same or the nature of the kind of business is not the same. So you're going to be probably a little more broad and talk specific to the skills and responsibilities that are being requested in the new job and highlighting those, and you're pulling that from your past experience and defining it in accordance with the new job. Okay. We'll move forward. I did already talk about technical skills summary, so in the interest of time, once again, just keep in mind, this is only going to show front and center on a resume if you are highly technical job family or nature of the employment you're seeking. With professional experience, you want to be consistent. Once again, I mentioned this at the beginning. So your formatting is going to be the same throughout. So how you put your dates in one job, you need to put your dates the same exact way in all your other subsequent listed jobs. You want to be consistent also with the way you format your title, company, city, state, etc. Is it all on one line? Is it on 2 lines? Make sure it's the same throughout the document. That's the key thing there. And then my highest recommendation is to left justify, so you can maximize your content on your page. Left justify your bulleted text, and even if you center your headers, and right justify your dates. Okay, for professional experience, begin every single bullet or descriptor with an action word. This helps sell you, and it also helps show your highest level of contribution to that employer. Place the most relevant descriptors at the beginning of each position or skills section, and the ones that are maybe less required for the job at the end, but still important, obviously. Describe your accomplishments and highlight successes and significant achievement using the PARS method, which we will talk about. We have 15 minutes, so we'll be able to get into that for 5 minutes. Show you know the business in the nature of the descriptions you're providing. Do not use long run-on descriptions of complex projects. Keep it short and engaging. So 2 to 3 lines. I wouldn't go any longer than 4 lines on a given descriptor. Okay, so let's go ahead and answer questions that are specific to the professional experience, jobs listed, etc., or how to address gaps. Any questions?
I mean, we still have a formatting question regarding your thoughts on color and, you know, if you feel that that really makes a resume stand out.
Yeah, so I would recommend staying with a really dark color. So most of the time, be conscientious that when you submit something electronically and it's in an applicant tracking system and then they pull it up and print it for others on the committee to see, they're going to probably see it in black and white, even if you provide a color. So, you know, I would provide a color that is black, dark gray, navy blue, but I would stay in those areas. And, you know, it seems more plain Jane, but quite frankly, they prefer that.
And maybe now is a good time to address some of this earlier questions regarding the best way to show career growth if you've stayed within the same company or department, but you've maybe been promoted from level 1 to level 2.
Yeah, so we're actually going to dive into that quite a bit in the next section. So I'm going to try and answer that in my next section. And if I don't get to that, please feel free to ask it again in a moment.
Okay, I think that is all for this section.
Awesome. So when we look at the professional experience section, I know we talked a little bit about the formatting elements, but now we're really going to get into, again, the meat and potatoes. What is it that you're putting in this section? You're demonstrating your skills noted in your summary at a much deeper, more specific level around projects and initiatives and results and accomplishments. So this process also inevitably prepares you for informational interviewing, or sorry, behavioral-based interviewing questions that you're going to get on your interview itself. So it's really beneficial to go through and do this process right. Show your highest level of contribution to a prospective employer using the PARS method. So this is the way to think about developing each and every one of those bulleted descriptors on your resume. Think to yourself with each one, what was the situation or the challenge? What's the project, the situation or challenge I'm trying to describe? And then secondarily, what did I do to impact this project? How did I influence it? What was my particular role and action taken? And then consequently, what was the result? What was the outcome of my role, my action, and my impact? Those 3 components need to be in every single descriptor that you have. Unfortunately, the pattern for most people is to provide descriptors on their resumes that read much like the requirements of a job description. So they have the responsibilities or the requirements, but they often do not have the results because there wouldn't be results. It's a job posting. So you don't want to make the mistake of leaving a result off of an action that's been taken or on a project or a situation. Your result needs to be there. The key is having a result that is either quantitative or qualitative in nature. So we're going to talk about that. For project situation or responsibility, you're describing one of your key projects or primary responsibilities. And then under the action, you're describing the actions, once again, you took, how you handled it, and the derived result. The action word at the beginning of the descriptor often begins to sort of lead you to and give away the direction of the subsequent result and outcome. So for example, here are those in 3 parts. Managed and maintained all records pertaining to purchasing and inventory. What's this person's problem, situation, project, etc. And then secondarily, they consolidated and computerized all records into one system with their actions. Then their new tracking system reduced annual costs by 20% with the derived result from those actions. So in summary, their bullet may read like consolidated purchasing and inventory records management system resulting in 20% annual cost savings. So you're not going to just tag each of your P, your A, and your R onto one another, but initially, if you create them separately, it will enable you to come up with a concise summary statement that has all 3 parts. And again, you definitely want all parts of a PARS in your individual bullets cited on your resume. So, any questions about that process? Because I know we're having to speed through. We have 12 minutes left, so I will answer questions about this. We'll go through the next section, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask more questions at the very end.
No questions.
Oh, okay. Wow. So the one other thing I want to mention about accomplishment statements is that you want to, and the resume examples that I will be able to provide for the Now Conference Committee to share will have many of these accomplishment statements listed. So but one of the things that I like, a key and a tip I like to provide people is often people struggle with the results phrase at the end of their descriptor. So they talk about their sort of their action, and they describe the problem or project or situation in the first 2 parts and phrases of the descriptor, and then they need to create a result phrase at the end to show the outcome of that particular action taken by you. Well, there are about 5 key transition words that can be useful so that you don't have to constantly say results in, resulted in, resulted in. You don't have to say resulted in over and over and over as a pattern in your resume. Instead, you can use words, of course, like resulted in, ensured that, yielded, increased, decreased, created. Those are some of the words that can show and the transition to result from the outcome of your actions. And so those are some of the tips I like to provide so that you aren't always using the same exact resulting in phrase to show your outcomes and results. All right, education and training. Somebody asked a question earlier which did address some of this, but essentially you want to list your degrees from highest to lowest, and usually you want your resume to list education at the end of the document and not at the beginning. Most people who have an education at the beginning sort of send the message, I don't have a lot of professional experience, because we see that often in recent college graduates. So the best thing to consider doing is listing your education at the end of your resume, having your summary first, then your professional experience, then your areas of education and supporting technical skills that you use to do your job. You can list certifications or licenses that are recognized in your field. As someone had asked earlier, don't use your years of graduation because it can unfortunately be used against you. And do use expected graduation dates. If you're in the middle of completing a degree, you can specify that it is pending and then, a year from then perhaps. Also, honors, awards, and associations can be on a resume. Just make sure they are related and that they're recognizing you for outstanding work. For example, Berkeley Star Awards, Spot, Achievement, etc. Those are really quality things to put on your resume regarding honors awards. And then if you're associated with an organization that would allow you to keep on top of trends and information and new education in that given area, that can be valuable as well. Mechanics. This is a funny part I always like to talk about because, believe it or not, I'm sure you all know spell check your resume or proofread. However, the computer that does a spell check process may not catch the fact that you're a project manger, because manger is a word in the spell check, so they may not catch that. So you need to literally go through or have someone else go through the document that isn't tired of looking at it because you've worked on it so much, you may not catch it yourself. those are the kinds of things it's great to have a good friend who's an editor do for you, because oftentimes an employer flat out will not accept a single spelling error. At Berkeley, I had a hiring manager years ago when I worked in central HR that had literally somebody who brought in millions of dollars for their organization, and they did not accept this candidate because they had used the word "it's" incorrectly in their cover letter, where it should have had an apostrophe or should not have, or one or the other, because the hiring manager had formerly been an English professor. So the bottom line is, believe it or not, that's something you just want to be so careful of so that there's no chance you can be ruled out for that reason. This is affiliated to the debunking the one-page resume myth. We talked a little bit about it about a moment ago. Again, 2 to 4 pages, very commonplace, especially if you have more than 5 to 10 years of experience. You're not going to do yourself justice by a one-page resume. And I highly recommend 2 in that case. And in my case, for example, mine is 4 pages. I have 25 years of experience. So there's no way I could get that in a shorter amount of content on that page spread so that it is aesthetically pleasing and has the appropriate amount of white space and consistency and pattern in text and content on the page. We're now about to review the key takeaways, and we'll have an opportunity for 5 minutes more of questions or any concerns or issues you'd like to address. So once again, really think about your resume being a self-marketing document. You want to realize that the whole goal of that resume is to get that interview invitation. And if you get an interview invitation, then you are going to really have the opportunity to get in there and sell what you're trying to convey to them all along in your self-marketing document itself. A chronological and combination style resume is preferred over a functional for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And every resume should have a summary of qualifications. I would never exclude that off of your document. Also, the PARS methodology is a must for highlighting your professional accomplishments and showing your highest level of contribution that is critical to convey to the employer you are a match for that job that was specifically posted, etc. And then use your professional experience as a header and not work history. In other words, you always want to focus on your highest level of professional experience, and using the header of professional experience is obviously going to be preferred over work history in doing that and accomplishing that. Make sure the information is relevant to the employer. And so in that, you don't have to put everything you've ever done, but just the most relevant, pertinent things that are going to really help sell you to that employer. And then always accompany your resume with a cover letter without fail. Should never be submitted without one. Any other questions about resume writing that you would like to discuss today?
Right, we have just a few. Can you talk a little bit more about skills that maybe don't have measurable results? So maybe one has strong communication skills. How would they translate that on their resume?
Right. So there's a couple of ways to do that. And this is the area I referenced earlier as your qualitative skills. So you have skills that are quantifiable, where you can show percentages of increase or decrease or things like that. But then you also have, and quite a people do, have more qualifiable skills versus quantifiable skills. And so some of those transition words I talked about earlier, like created such and such, or increased morale, or part of that piece I mentioned in the summary itself of something you were recognized for, awards you received in given areas, the ability to manage and a result that may be derived from a quality manager, things like becoming a manager of choice by your employees because they nominated you for a management award or something of that nature. So you're really showing the nature of the work you're doing and the results that are derived from that work, and you're demonstrating it in each of your descriptors.
Great. What if one doesn't have direct job experience, however, they might have the education to back it up?
So this is a good point, and especially someone who is a more recent grad, maybe you've just been in the workforce for 3 to 5 years, for example. Sometimes even in the education section, you can really develop your education section more to show skill areas and headers on projects, leadership abilities that you had on those projects, etc. So you can really hone in and highlight specific courses taken, specific functions handled, and things like that under the umbrella of your education, your work, your research, things like that. So you can actually develop and blow out your educational section like a mini professional experience section accordingly if you really want to sell those particular skills that you don't have any experience doing necessarily yet, but you have the knowledge and ability to do it.
Great. So what do you feel about listing short hobbies or community service in the kind of other section? Do you find that it's distracting, that it's helpful?
This is actually a great question. And, if you volunteer at a shelter for pets, or you paint and you're an artist, or you name it, it could be anything. The reality is, for some jobs, that experience, that skill may not be relevant. However, let's say you are applying for a marketing and communications job. If you are an artist or a painter, that might be a good thing to put on there because it is an adjacent skill. It shows you're going to have the eye for things like design and color in a way that is beyond the level of experience that might be required for somebody in that role or job family.
Great. And then you had spoke briefly about the education, but what are your thoughts of putting a GPA?
I recommend it actually because the GPA, unless it's poor, I would not list it, of course. But if it's high, I think there's nothing wrong with listing it. I believe, I have to go back and look back, but I believe my GPA, actually it's not GPA for me. I think I put, for example, baccalaureate degree, a magna cum laude, and then graduated with distinction, I think is what they call it for your master's work. So I didn't put GPA, but I put those titles, which are often affiliated with a specific GPA, but it is acceptable to do so if you'd like. I know we're coming close, but I'm happy to answer any last questions.
Just how high is high for GPA to be impressive enough to list?
I think 3.5 and above would be okay to list. Otherwise, to be honest with you, it doesn't sell you nearly as much as your work experience and your direct contribution ability to that employer for the skills that they're requiring and needing for that next role and job.
And how would you title this section for community service and or hobbies?
You can literally title it anything you want. You can say additional skills and interests. You can say volunteer experience. You can say community service. There's all kinds of possibilities. And really, you can make the decision based on both how accurately that title describes the nature of that affiliation and outside work or service, as well as what best ties into the nature of the work required in that next job. And so you might label it based on what would seem to pair or fit most with that field, job family, or job title.
In the interest of time, that would be all the questions we have.
All right.
Do you have any final comments?
I just want to say thank you all so much for attending today. I can see a few of the faces on my screen, but other than that, I appreciate you joining the session. And Tara's going to share with you the details of completing the presentation evaluation, which will be very important, obviously, because this is the first year we're doing this virtually. So thank you for any time you contribute to that feedback.
Thank you, Kim, for such a great presentation. Again, thank you very much, and we appreciate it, and hopefully you all get to enjoy your lunch. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.